And the Labour leader of the opposition, Harold Wilson, presented a rather different image from that of the traditional ruling class.
So far as his approach to his, what sort of image he presented, he was a sort of rather a cheeky, chappy image. It certainly wasn't a Grassmore image, it wasn't a grand style. He was a figure of lower middle-class origins, and he rather gloried in that.
He was a man of simple tastes. I mean, he never mixed with the duchesses. There was no danger that he would be bought off. And the way Ramsay MacDonald was, Lady Londonderry and all that, he was a simple man. People made fun of it because he had HP sauce on his meals and on his food and so on and so on. But that was genuine. And he didn't like the fancy people around who were always mixing at the top. His suspicion of Dick Crossman for going to have lunch with Lady Pamela Berry and all that sort of stuff was really quite profound.
When I think of that ghastly little man with his ghastly little pipe and his ghastly little Macintosh and his ghastly little glass of Sanatogen, well, I mean, Hitler had more class than that ghastly little man.
Private Eye's parody captured the feelings of some members of the upper class towards Wilson. He frightened them. 25 years before Neil Kinnock, Wilson had moved himself and his party's policy from the left in an attempt to appeal to middle-class voters.
At 35, I was in the cabinet. I was sure that a policy would only tie me down. At 45, I began to worry about the future Labour offered. But I knew that a policy would be the biggest disadvantage of all. But today, at 46, at last I can afford a policy. Any ideas?
So this is what 1964 can mean. A chance for change. More than that. A time for resurgence. A chance to sweep away the Grouse-Moore conception of national leadership.
The Grousemoors of Scotland were where the Conservative Prime Minister spent his August of 1964. Shooting driven grouse was a favoured pursuit of the landed classes, who included Lord Hume. Although he'd renounced his earldom on becoming Prime Minister, Hume could scarcely have presented a greater social contrast to Harold Wilson.
One of the main criticisms of your appointment, Lord Hume, has been that you come from a so-called sheltered aristocratic background. Do you know how the other half lives?
Well, of course, I think this is inverted snobbery to begin with, and secondly, I reject the proposition there are two halves of the nation.
And that was the great turning point. The discrediting of the Tory party by their choice of this aristocrat who admitted that he really knew nothing about economics and made the very unfortunate joke that he always had to do his counting by matchsticks. Well, I mean, it was an insult to the British people to think that that snobism was still there so strongly that they'd fall for the 14th Earl of Hume.
Hume responded that Wilson was no doubt, after all, the 14th Mr. Wilson. Sir Alec proved a surprisingly robust election opponent.
I'm not going to make another speech, so you can be easy about that. It's been a wonderful meeting this afternoon. Now you all know what you've got to do, so go to it, and the best of luck. God bless.
Wilson had taken President Kennedy as his role model in the '64 election. Wilson promised to create a new Britain where class distinctions would become irrelevant as brains took precedence over blue blood.
We decided that if we were going to get Harold across to the people, as the media as such in general, press particularly, had a bias that was a right-wing bias, we had to make the running on television. And to do that, you had to be like someone they would know. You couldn't be some stiff, remote figure. You had to be a relaxed, identifiable figure.
He made it look as if everything was possible for the people. Here, suddenly, they were given this opportunity with this young man who'd made his own way up from the bottom, from a working-class family through Oxford, done extremely well, obviously very clever. He articulated and reflected everything, really, that they were hoping for themselves and for their children. The little boy standing in the cloth cap on the doorstep of number 10 was their little boy who would be standing there next year, and he might too make it one day to number 10.
Wilson first made it to number 10 with a majority of just 5. He pledged to overturn the old class system by a new technological revolution.
In the cabinet room and the boardroom alike, that revolution cannot become a reality unless we are prepared to make far-reaching changes in economic and social attitudes which permeate our whole system of society. The Britain that is going to be forged in the white heat of this revolution will be no place for restrictive practices or for outdated methods on either side of industry.
Wilson wanted his scientific and social revolution to transform industry, where deeply entrenched class prejudices had reinforced the social divide between management and workers. After a lifetime spent working for this metal-bashing firm, Harold Stansfield was invited up to the boardroom on his retirement day.
Come on in, Harold.
How do you do, sir?
It's a great day for you.
It is, yes.
50 years.
2 years, 5 months and 1 week.
My God, that's a long time ago. It was before I was here, I think.
Oh.
As part of this, to sort of celebrate the great occasion for the company, the board have decided to give you a small presentation to mark the occasion. On your birthday, your retirement, the first under the scheme. And here is a canteen of best Sheffield cutlery. We'd like to give you.
That's very nice. I appreciate that very much.
Congratulations. But
thank you, sir.
There's one point I would like to make, Harold. It's a personal one, that I don't think people realize just how much companies like this and the industry as a whole owe to people like yourself who work for the same company for 50 years.
Yes.
You've really enjoyed the 50 years?
Yes, it's been a pleasure working here.
Every company that you talk to, they say, oh, we're all a team here, but it's a load of rubbish a lot of the time. And the larger the company, the more the politics of the small p, the more hierarchical the whole setup is.
This lavatory is for members of the staff. Next to it is an identical one, but it's only for use by members of the board of directors.
Television showed how directors had their own carpeted dining room, while along the corridor, the manager's dining room was tiled.
And if you were one of the plebs, as I was, you ate in the canteen. But if you'd become a buyer, you ate in a little glass box, which is incredibly uncomfortable in the summer, because there was no such thing as air conditioning. But they all sat there and sweltering, you know, surrounded by sweat and status. And if you were a manager, you were in another glass box. And if you were a director, you ate in the director's part of the company's restaurant, which used to be on the 4th floor. So, I mean, the whole thing was hierarchical to the nth degree.
I well remember in a factory in Banbury where the management, this is the American company, decided to have a single status canteen. And I said, marvellous, very good. I said, I'm going down there one day to see how it works. And when I went down there, the canteen had been divided up by the people into 4 separate groups. There were the manual workers on one side, the white-collar workers on another, lower management in the 4th group, senior management sitting in the 4th. And I said to some of our lads, go across there and sit with those bloody managers and get talking to them, mix with them. Oh, no, we don't want them to hear what we're talking about. So there's a natural segregation takes place in this society that ought never to be, but it happens.
Wilson wanted to end social segregation. A Labour Prime Minister, he said, had to be like an express train driver. Unless he kept up to speed, the passengers would start squabbling about the direction. And he prefigured John Major, arguing that education was the key to his social reforms.
I think, you know, the whole progress of education, as far as it's gone, is, or should be, turning this country into a genuinely classless society.
We believe that Britain's future depends on the thrusting ability and even iconoclasm of millions of products of our grammar schools, our comprehensive schools, our technical schools and colleges, our secondary moderns and the rest.
Harold Wilson, of whom in later years I became extremely fond and a considerable admirer of him as a politician, seemed to me to be just that touch of a fraud. There he was, the grammar school boy, offering this opening to people from my class to take their place in society as a whole, busy shutting down the grammar schools and cutting us off from that opportunity.
When somebody explained to Wilson, he being a grammar school boy, that we were in favour of comprehensive schools, he said, grammar schools will go over my dead body. He was a meritocrat. He wasn't an egalitarian. And for him, it was a question of opening up more ladders for the Harold Wilsons of this world who could challenge the stuffy men in the boardroom. It was a bit like having a Davis escape apparatus on the submarine rather than trying to lift the whole submarine.
As England swung in the 60s, it seemed that something of a social revolution was taking place.
A working class hero is something to be. A working class hero is something.
Harold Wilson took care to associate himself with the new working class heroes. He presented the Beatles with Showbiz Awards and made them MBEs.
Same goes for me. Thank you very much for giving us this Silver Heart. But I still think you should have given one to good old Mr. Wilson.
Good old Mr. Wilson put the new working class showbiz stars on his guest list for parties at number 10.
We used to have a lot of people who would be known, not only known to the readers of newspapers, but people particularly on the entertainment side. We had the Beatles, of course. Well, they were almost constituents of mine. There had been, I'm quite sure, for a very long time before, a feeling that artists, entertainers, singers were not really the sort of people you asked to number 10, and we just sort of moved the country forward a few years.
Cheers.
What line of business are you in, Mr...
Stepchild.
No, your first name.
Harold.
Harold. I have an uncle in the government by that name.
What, not?
Oh, no. Just an old junior minister.
Oh.
What exactly do you do, Harold? Why were you knocking at my door?
I'm a rag and bone man.
A rag and bone man? How interesting. I've never met a rag and bone man before.
The society was loosened up in the 60s in a way which many of us found extremely uncomfortable, but which we've survived and which in some ways we've benefited from. It's very easy to get very uptight about the 1960s, and no one gets more uptight about them than I do. I hated them, by and large, but I have to admit, they did cause the ice to melt a bit, and they certainly changed society.
I do regret the fact that there is no longer any recognizable lot of role models. I think on the whole, if you have to choose between having the Duke of this, that, and the other being the role model, or a pop singer, Mick Jagger, being a role model, marginally I would think that the Duke was better than the pop singer.
Blair Castle, Perthshire. His Grace George Ian Murray, 10th Duke of Athol, greets his staff.
Morning, Mrs. McRae.
Good morning, Your Grace.
Good morning, Your Grace.
Good morning, Your Grace.
Good morning, Your Grace.
Euston Hall, Norfolk. Charles Alfred Euston Fitzroy, 10th Duke of Grafton, eats alone.
Well, it's almost incredible to believe that only 40 years ago my grandfather was coming here with about 100 servants. Today we struggle along with about 4. And a good servant today is unobtainable. I think the English servant, anyway, no, the English people won't go into domestic service in these days. I think it wouldn't matter so much if we were trying to raise people up. But I think the whole movement is downward. They want to equalize everybody on a lower grade. Not that I'm any politician. I hate politics of any sort.
George Brown, Harold Wilson's deputy, drew up the National Economic Plan designed to end the class divide in industry. The revolutionary document was signed by the government, the employers and the trades unions.
History is being made here today. Here, on one sheet of paper, are stated the aims of a modern society that has put the class war behind it.
The Oxford organ scholar Ted Heath was the Tories' answer to Wilson's classless appeal. Heath was the son of a carpenter and a lady's maid.
One for you, one for you, one for the party.
He was also the first grammar school boy to lead the Tory party.
Here you are, Graham. You must take the one for the party.
The Tories have a genius for picking people, regardless of their background or anything else, who they thought could win elections. You'll recollect how Disraeli was made leader of the Conservative Party by the great wealthy landed interest, who essentially met at the club and discussed who on earth could get the Conservative Party back into power. And it was said, well, there's this fellow Disraeli. He's a Jew and this and that, and, well, is he a gentleman? No. Then we'll make him a gentleman. And they actually made him a gentleman. They provided him with an estate and made him leader of the party. There's a rather similar thing happened with Ted Heath. It was quite clear that we had been badly defeated, not least because of Wilson's skill in playing the Grassmore image and the remoteness and old-fashionedness of the Conservative Party against his Labour Party, the white heat of technology, the technocrat, the classless society.
Wilson's skilled footwork had helped win him a landslide victory in '66 to match Attlee's 1945 election triumph, when Labour had come to power promising to create a classless New Jerusalem. Now even Oxford and Exeter had gone Labour.
It was a very classless appeal. It was an appeal which cut deep into the middle class and also held the working class, and massively won the election of '66. But the white heat of the technological revolution began to be a slightly doubtful phrase as time went on and the government plunged into economic crisis after economic crisis.
Devaluation, unemployment and inflation soon eroded Wilson's support. He became the target for demonstrators wherever he went.
We'd had 3 years of public meetings where he had been heckled badly, eggs had been thrown at him, tomato ketchup, flour. He used to come home looking absolutely awful. I mean, covered from head to foot, and clothes had to be cleaned.
All those in favour, please show.
A series of strikes in key industries convinced Wilson that to regain Labour's electoral appeal,
Are there any against?
he had to curb the powers of the unions. He put Barbara Castle, the former darling of the left, in charge of reforming the unions. She called her white paper In Place of Strife. The unions protested bitterly against the white paper. They claimed the Labour government was betraying the working class, whose interests it had been elected to promote.
Undoubtedly, my proposals for trade union reform in place of strife did stir up feeling very much in the trade union movement against the Labour government. I don't think it stirred it up in the country against it, because the country was very fed up with the rash of unofficial strikes. People got very, very annoyed. They used to write to me, you know. I mean, say you've had a hard day at work and it's raining and you want to get home and have your tea, and you go to the bus stop and suddenly there's been a lightning strike. You don't exactly say, up the trade unions, do you? You say, somebody ought to do something about this. I want to get home.
Fellow trade unionists, brothers and sisters, the unholy trinity of the Labour government, Wilson, Roy Jenkins and Barbara Castle will go down in the history of the trade union movement as the people who want to turn back the clock a century.
Of course, when Labour lost its link with organised, when the Labour government lost its link with organised labour, that paved the way for the 1970 defeat.
The advertising man, Barry Day, was one of Ted Heath's chief media gurus during the 1970 general election. Using sophisticated new marketing techniques and private opinion polls, Day identified a crucial section of the electorate for Heath and the Tories to target.
Our polls showed us that there was one segment, if you like, an oppressed majority called women, working class, lower middle class, C1, C2 housewives. And then we said to these ladies, there has been something happening in this country ever since women have had the vote. In working class households, husband and wife go to the polls, and he says to her, when you get in there, Joe Smith, Labour, put your cross there, I'll see you outside and we'll go around the pub. She'd do that, by and large, from all we could see. She didn't know much about it. She left that to her husband. He told her, and they've made a mess of it, but, you know, what can you do? We said, your mind's your own. This is the early days of feminism. Your vote's your own, and it's secret. Do what you think. And more of them voted for us than we had any right to expect, I think, in the event. And we used a film which we call Sylvia, where we took a young working class, forgive the phrase, a working class housewife, about 23, with one small child. She has to work because they can't manage without her income.
Name, Sylvia. Age,
Hello?
22.
Yes, I'll have
Occupation?
a moment.
Working housewife with one child.
My husband's a driver. Drives, delivers, deliveries to shops and things. He doesn't earn a great deal to start with, and most of it's taken out in tax. He's hardly got enough to keep the family going. Working person has always voted Labour, but I think a lot of people have changed their mind now. Won't vote Labour again. I mean, the promises of everything was going to be better, but nothing seems to have got better. The wages have risen a little bit, but the cost of living has taken over that. So we haven't got anywhere at all, really. With all the strikes and things going on, you can't say that they've managed the country at all well. Well, I think my husband will vote Labour because he's always voted Labour, and generations before him have voted Labour, and he's not easily persuaded, to vote anything else. I think he will keep up his tradition of voting Labour, but I certainly won't. I shall vote Conservative. And I think he'll come over to my way of thinking sooner or later.
We were prepared to appeal to all wives who were tired of being told by their husbands who they got to vote for. And that wasn't limited to middle-class wives, I can tell you.
Working class.
All working-class wives. I very quickly learned that wives would say, yes, and don't tell my old man, but he thinks I'm voting with you. I'm not. I'm with you.
The Queen has asked me to form the next government, and I am indeed proud to accept. To govern is to serve. This government will be at the service of all the people, the whole nation. Our purpose is not to divide, but to unite, and where there are differences, to bring reconciliation, to create one nation.
The Tory party, celebrating at its victory conference, was already starting to look a rather different party from the old-style upper-class paternalists of the Macmillan-Hume era. Margaret Thatcher was in the new cabinet, which promised to break down class barriers through a radical programme of tax incentives and fundamental reform of the trades unions.
When Mr. Heath came in with proposals for reform of that kind, with proposals to spread property ownership more widely, with many of the modern and forward-looking aspects which later became known as Thatcherism in his manifesto, I think it appealed to that group of people who were coming up from the working classes into the middle classes at that time.
Well, he would say that. He's got to try to defend the last decade in which he was deeply involved. But we, above all, had the policy of the sale of council houses. And at that time, it was strongly opposed by Mrs. Thatcher.
Opposed by Mrs. Thatcher?
Strongly opposed by Mrs. Thatcher.
What, in the cabinet?
Yes. And in party discussions. That's a revelation for you, isn't it?
But in the early days of his government, before rapidly rising unemployment forced a U-turn, Heath was bitterly criticised for abandoning the Tories' traditions of upper-class paternalism.
It's a government of the meritocracy, of lower middle-class boys who have made it. They've worked very hard, they've got a lot of intelligence, they believe in individual effort. They have very little sympathy with failure. Unfortunately, most people in life, to varying degrees, are failures. Therefore, you have a government, what I call the carnivorous section of the middle classes. Tough, hard, uncompassionate.
Wonder what Ted Heath's doing now. Yes, he'll be at the Athenaeum. I just finished dinner. The taste of the Strasbourg goose pâté, competing with the Chateau Lafite 55. He'll be sitting by the fire, lighting a Romeo and Juliet, and warming a balloon of Grand Fin champagne cognac with his hand, worrying himself sick about 1 million unemployed. God, what a farce!
I believe that the 70s was a time when the class structure in this country was breaking down. And because of that, it was a very violent time. There was even a throwback later into the 80s, but the 70s, I think, was really the germ of what was happening.
Violence had become the regular accompaniment to Heath's new laws to curb the powers of the unions. In the van of the opposition to the Heath government was the Miners' Union.
This rally declares its support for the wages demands of the miners and pledges solidarity in the event of strike action. And I want you to vote with your voice. And all those who agree with it say yes, and let Ted Heath hear you in Blackpool. All in favour say yes. Is there any against?
Heath's reaction to the 1974 miners' strike was power cuts, a 3-day week, and a general election.
People don't remember, perhaps, that they went into their offices at funny hours and had to move their desks close to the window in order to be able to work, because you only had electricity certain days a week. You had a 3-day week for having electricity in your particular area. I mean, it's quite extraordinary how something which was basically a class struggle, in fact, brought the nation to such a stage.
What do you think it was that brought down the Heath government?
Class, conflict. I mean, and the man was I mean, in political terms, he was an idiot, wasn't he? I mean, here's a bloke, he's been defeated by the miners in 1972. You know, he got dusted down in the 72 strike with the National Union of Mine Workers. We won nearly every demand that we asked for. Along comes a repeat performance at the back end of 1973, early 74. And what does he do? He goes to the country.
We got more votes. We got more votes.
But not more seats?
No, because of the system in this country.
I suppose the 1974 election was the first election for some time, I can't think of one previously, where a Conservative government lost the confidence of the working class and were defeated. It wasn't the miners defeated them. When the electorate said, do we vote for the miners who dig our coal, or do we vote for this man who says who governs Britain as if he was born to rule, they voted for the miners, or for the Labour Party.
Who said that?
Tony Benn.
Oh, well, he would, wouldn't he? Of course. He comes from the upper class. He's got the money. I haven't.
As his grand piano was removed from number 10, the Prime Minister who'd promised to create social harmony bequeathed the country in discord. Labour had moved sharply to the left. and many middle-class Tory voters had defected to the Liberals. For Ted Heath, the music had stopped. The new Tory leader seemed an unlikely choice to attract back lost Conservative votes in the industrial heartlands of the Midlands and the North. An upwardly mobile grocer's daughter, Mrs. Thatcher said, "The charm of England is the ease with which one can move into the middle classes."
When the children were young, I always had an English nanny. I never had an au pair because I couldn't really have gone out and left them with an easy mind because I wouldn't have been quite certain whether the au pair could speak English or knew how to ring the hospital if anything happened. So always I had a good English nanny, which made a world of difference.
I didn't see in Mrs. Thatcher, I must say, someone who was going to naturally appeal to the Midlands car worker. Indeed, that was one of the problems. We had that image problem of her, the suburban housewife, as she was called by many of her opponents, the grocer's daughter, the image of the woman that wore pale blue twin sets and spoke with a rather odd accent. It was clearly going to be difficult in that sense.
Wilson's successor, Jim Callaghan, seemed to have a broader appeal across the classes than Mrs. Thatcher. But Uncle Jim had inherited a dismal economic legacy.
The first two people I saw when I became Prime Minister, after I'd appointed ministers, were the Governor of the Bank of England and Jack Jones, who was the General Secretary of the T&G. And what I heard made my hair stand on end.
Callaghan discovered that Britain was facing bankruptcy, and the IMF would only agree to bail us out on the strictest terms.
It means sticking to the very painful cuts in public expenditure on which the government's already decided. That's what it means, and that's what I'm asking for. That's what I'm going to negotiate for, and I ask the conference to support me in that task.
They decided to settle for the IMF terms, and that really was, it's like the IMF coming along to the Labour government and said, here you are, forget your own manifesto. We know you got one in October 1974. We brought a fresh one from America. These are your new manifesto policies. Stick to these or else.
But you see, those people didn't recognise, and this is a thing which even some Treasury officials had to learn by experience, which is that deficit is something you have to finance by borrowing. And when you have to borrow, you're in the hands of your creditor. And this was the central problem, and that's why I was so glad when what I called sod-off day came along. I only drew half of the IMF money, and I'd paid the equivalent all back before I left office.
Well, it seemed as though we were drifting onto the rocks. A sort of feeling of hopelessness, of class war, almost. And any of us who went abroad at all knew how we were looked on abroad as being totally on the down.
But in one English stately home, there was no despair. The young peer who'd inherited Brocket Hall decided that the way to make ends meet was to turn his home into a business conference centre.
I started this in the mid-70s after I left the army, and the economy wasn't in very good shape then, you'll probably remember. What we're selling here, you know, with the 50-bedroom establishment and golf courses and God knows what else, is the old style of life that existed with the upper classes probably at the turn of the century. In fact, although maybe the class system's changed, I'm now trying to sell the old class system.
While Mrs. Thatcher promoted the entrepreneurial spirit, some of her upper-class Conservative opponents claimed that she was busy turning the party into a middle-class preservation society.
Well, it depends what they mean by middle-class preservation society. I think the values to which they're referring, namely the values of thrift, hard work, law and order, making jolly certain the state doesn't get too much power, pride in local communities, not having things too large because I don't like size. These may be associated with middle-class virtues, but in fact they run all through society.
In some ways, she succeeded in turning the Tory party into a middle-class preservation society. Not necessarily with real middle-class people. It's just all the trappings of middle-class land that exist. Actually, it's quite a comfortable one when you think about it.
I don't think she wanted to turn the party into a middle-class preservation society. What she wanted to do was to use and extend many of the values of the middle classes and to base a society upon those values, but to spread them more widely and particularly downwards into the C's and D's.
People from my sort of background needed grammar schools to compete with children from privileged homes like Shirley Williams and Anthony Wedgwood Benn.
I want to see Maggie Thatcher cry. Let's send her back to Harrods. She's ordered the blue curtains for number 10 Downing Street. Let's make her cancel the order.
I'd like to tell you the story of the Honourable Algernon, who was born with a silver spoon in his mouth. He's called honourable because his father was a lord, and his father before that, going back to the days when what you were born was all that counted. Not that it's changed so much, I'm afraid. When it comes to schools, Algernon's parents would never let him mix with ordinary boys. Armed with the old school tie, there's no question of being an unemployed school leaver for Algernon. He just walks straight into the cosy jobs reserved for his kind.
But the unions were once again on the march against a Labour government. Jim Callaghan had been known as the keeper of the cloth cap because of his closeness to the unions. But now they were calling him a class traitor because he wanted to limit wage rises to 5%.
And it's a 5% increase we're fighting against at the moment. It has meant that those who need the increases most get least, and those who need the increases least get most.
They should have been willing to have accepted our advice and our view, which was conceived in the best interests of the workers of this country, in the best interests of the national interest as a whole, that was the way in which to conduct our future. And because they didn't, I regret very much the consequences that have followed.
I mean, when the whole winter of discontent, as it was called, with all the
I invented
excesses.
that phrase, the winter of discontent, has lived to haunt me. I first said it, and now everybody else uses it against me. But I said we're going to have a winter of discontent. But I wanted to ride it out. If only I'd had a majority, the kind of majority that the present government has got, oh boy, how I would have enjoyed that.
Tell you what I don't want to see.
What's that?
Labour in power again.
Labour in power? Was that the Marx Brothers?
No, another bunch of comedians.
Coming shortly, the Conservatives.
Next week, we conclude the tragicomic story of the class factor in our political life, starting with the year that the ship of state found Margaret Thatcher at its helm.
All you chaps got in our photograph.